you have failed. You've bankrupted this business called your life. And now you should probably go hire a different CEO because you kind of sucked. Like you tanked this. And so I checked myself into 3 12-step programs all at once. And that became the basis for relearning how to think and how to be in the world as if I were a newborn starting over, learning from different people, learning different philosophies and different ways of thinking. And then, they helped me to rebuild my life from the ground up in a much stronger foundation than I ever had.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred sober living option to help AA newcomers stay sober during their first year in the program. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place. Because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery, here in the always sunny and always sober Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Let's get clear on one thing. We believe that a relapse or a slip is not a part of recovery. And that's exactly why this podcast is dedicated to you or any loved one you know in their first year of striving to live a clean and sober life. The purpose of this podcast is to come clean with all of the misinformation that's out there about recovery, addiction treatment, mental illness, and strategies to stay sober in general. So if you believe you're in the right place, or if you know someone who is struggling with addiction, it's my privilege to share this podcast with you. Now, I have no idea if you and I have ever met, but what I do know is that AA saved my life. And I also know that to find long-term recovery and live happy, joyous, and free, it's not just about stopping your drinking, drugging, gambling, sexual indiscretions, or any other addiction you may have struggled with or suffered from. Because at Camelback Recovery, we believe that sobriety can and should be fun. And look, any recovery process is not easy. It is challenging. It can sometimes be annoying. And for the most of us, it is often difficult to stay on the path. But here's the good news. The self-awareness you gain from listening to this podcast, especially if you are in your first year of your recovery, will help you make better choices, which will ultimately lead you to living a kick-ass sober life. Visit camelbackrecovery.com to learn more about our treatment strategies for alcoholism, drug addiction, or mental illness. And we even offer recovery coaching so that you can enjoy the freedom and happiness you've always searched for. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with a woman that was crowned national pageant winner, Mrs. American 2021, and earned top 6 finalist at Mrs. World 2022. She loves her roles as mama to 3 kiddos and dedicated wife. She co-hosts a podcast with her husband called Business with Benefits, helping couples build successful lifestyles without sacrificing marriages in the process. And what if I told you that this woman's life was destroyed by a variety of addictive substances and behaviors in 2009? What if I told you that getting clean and sober and continuing to live a sober lifestyle, along with staying connected to the recovery community, gets all of the credit for all she is and has today? She has transformed her life, and being clean and sober gets all the credit. Her most important calling today is her role as a recovery advocate and inspirational speaker. She's passionate about sharing her transformational story. Her dynamic life demonstrates that recovery delivers dreams. Today, I'm here with Hannah Kirkpatrick, and we're going to talk about her story, her experience, strength, and hope. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tim. Wow, what an introduction. That just takes me through such journeys, even listening to that amazing intro. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm so looking forward to learning more about you today. And we met on LinkedIn of all places, and it just happens that we're both in recovery and we both speak about recovery. And so here we are, and we both live in Arizona. And so I'm just excited to learn more. And I know that there are lots of other people out there that are going to gain something from hearing more about you and more about your story.
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm not here for profit, right? We volunteer I mean, those of us that talk about our recovery stories, we volunteer our time to do it. I volunteered my time when I was Mrs. Arizona American, and prior to that, but then even more, I turned up the volume of my service as Mrs. Arizona American. And then when I went on and won the national competition, they're really bad judges of character, apparently, at the national level. Then I gave another year of service to just share my story and to give people in recovery hope that there is an awesome life on the other side of recovery. And, then I prepared for Mrs. World, and it's all just of service, right? Every day I just wake up and I go like, all right, higher power, just use me in whatever way I can be of greatest service to you and to my fellows. And that's all stuff that I learned in the 12 steps. Prior to that, it was all about me, 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 me. What can I get? What can I get? What can I get? And what a cool transition. I never would have imagined I'll be honest, at 40 years old, that all of a sudden, I'm having these life awakenings that it's like, no, it's actually about the giving more so than the receiving. And the gifts come when my focus is on giving. So all of that to say, I'm really glad to be here. I'm super excited that you took time out of your day when you're traveling to have a chat with me as well. Yeah.
And it just makes me think of what you're talking about, being of service, and to get everything we want we all want fulfillment. That's why people lie, cheat, and steal, because they want a big house, they want a nice car, they want all these things, they want stuff, and everybody's after fulfillment. And really, the way we get fulfillment is by being of service, by being other-centered, by making it about someone else. And that's just like, it's the crazy thing. And it took me forever to learn that, and I know it took you forever to learn that. But now that we've learned it, it's like, okay, here we are. Life is good.
Yeah, so, and it's the greatest news. Like, it's the biggest secret that nobody ever told me, and most out there in the world outside of recovery programs. I feel like, except for in some, spiritual and religious traditions, people just don't talk about it in those terms. It's like, especially if you're business oriented, if you're type A, you're goal driven, it's like, set your goals, your long-term goals, and then create your midterm goals and your short-term goals, and then your daily habits that are going to support those things so that you can climb your way to what you want to achieve. And while that's amazing for certain things, such as like this dream of having a national pageant title, right, that I had for a long time, that was a goal, and I had to break that down. And there was a ton of work that went into that. But what really, I believe, to my core, allowed me to actually win this time when I hadn't in the past, was because I let go of the outcome. It was because I wasn't in it just to win it. I wasn't in it for what it would give to me. I literally showed up just to be of service. And I didn't know whether that was going to be to fix somebody else's heels on the way out onto the stage when they tripped, or whether it was going to be to actually do that year of service. But what a cool secret that things actually ironically come to you when you give up the understanding that they're going to give you the fulfillment. You have to find the fulfillment first, and then that magnetically attracts the wins into your life. And man, if I had known that, right? Like, wouldn't it have been cool to be taught that as a kid?
I imagine that, but it's like, life happens for me, not to me, right? And so we all had to do the things that we did to get to where we are today, and now we get to share it. So let's get into it. So tell me about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Vermont, in a relatively small town, and I had two parents that were married, mostly happily, and an older brother. I grew up with unconditional love. I grew up with pretty high standards, I feel like, and that was okay with me, because from the earliest time that I remember, I wanted to achieve and I wanted perfection, and I was not okay with anything that was less than that. I'll use air quotes for those that are listening, because I've since learned that perfection isn't a thing. It doesn't even exist. But in my brain, that's from the youngest memories that I have. It was like, this would be perfect if, but otherwise I'm one of the few people. I actually did a podcast interview recently with Brandon Lee, who is another celebrity here in the Phoenix area, and this amazing, 5-time Emmy award-winning journalist. And he does so much cool work in the recovery space to let people know that it's based on trauma. And so I came into his interview and he was like, Hannah, what was your trauma as a kid? And I went, I don't have any trauma. I'm one of the few people that there isn't that major trauma in my early story. I feel like I was an alcoholic, mentality, meaning I was compulsive, and I was self-centered, and I see the world in black and white, like extremes with very little gray in the middle since I was born. I mean, so I had that all the way through, even despite an amazing childhood. So I don't have a great story, but I think that's important for people to hear too. I was a 3-season athlete. I was a straight A and B student. I was a perfect little church girl. I didn't swear. I didn't smoke. I didn't date boys. I actually, the only trauma that I can think of that we discovered for me was I actually was an ugly duckling in high school. I had severe acne, and it was so bad that I had to take some days off of school here and there. It was all over my face, all over my chest and my back. I was tall and super skinny, and I was really awkward and just gangly looking. I cut off all my hair, and then I tried to dye it blonde, and it turned out orange. And so I was this like super acne, orange hair, I was just a mess. And I got picked on, as kids do. I just internalized, I think at that stage in my life, or maybe younger, I don't know, that I wasn't enough. I never felt smart enough. I hung out with kids that were all smarter than me. And that isn't that hard to do. You may have figured that out already, but I always try. That's the one thing I do well, is spend time with people who are smarter than me. And I was not fast enough. I was on the track team, and I wasn't fast enough. I didn't feel like I was pretty enough for sure. I wasn't good enough at business to make my dad happy, and I wasn't good enough at the domestic stuff to make my mom happy. And so from my earliest recollection, despite an amazing upbringing, I have that memory of never feeling enough or worthy.
Well, that right there sounds like a lot of trauma to me. All of the things that you just listed, those are all traumatic events. And there's, have you ever heard there's the big T and the little T?
No, I haven't done any trauma training because I never identified with it.
I did an interview with a guy named Shalev Amar. He's not a doctor, but he has he talks trauma was kind of the focus of the interview, and the little trauma can be a little T can be somebody cussing you out. The little T can be somebody just saying something to you that makes you feel uncomfortable. A big T can be a car accident. The big T can be somebody, maybe you got in a fight when you were in high school or something like that. I mean, so trauma, I would say, is kind of on a spectrum. So yeah, there's trauma everywhere. I mean, so just because it's not this big event or this big ordeal doesn't necessarily mean that it's not traumatic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's a new understanding for me. I think because I grew up in this family of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Feelings weren't really a thing. It was stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, and shut up. You're being a sissy if you're showing any emotion whatsoever.
Well, and hey, even that comment could be traumatic.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you really did have feelings. And your feelings aren't validated, and you're told by your parents or people that are older than you to sit down and shut up and stop crying because it's not a big deal. So anyway.
Yeah,
okay,
no.
So,
what do we do with that trauma, right? It's like either I could turn around and hurt others, I could hurt myself, or I could pretend that it doesn't exist. Those are the options that I see of how to deal with it. Right. And I guess I chose let's have it not exist. And I just internalize everything by hurting myself. And that's the only way that I know. It starts with the self-talk of you're not enough. Nobody wants to hear from you. Your life isn't worthy. You're not worthy. All of that stuff. And that's just sort of how I always dealt with it. And I think that's what eventually turned into eating disorder, and it turned into starting to use alcohol and drugs and validation seeking from men once I started to get male attention and figured that out, how to use that to feed my own sense of self-worth, and food and compulsive overeating to hurt myself, to stuff the feelings, to not have to feel. I mean, I feel like I used so many behaviors to try to just either numb out and not feel, or to get a little bit higher, like just a little bit better than my normal. And And I guess that to me is what addictive illness is. It's just using something other than me, whether it's a behavior or a substance, to check out and to feel a little different than I do naturally. And that started, when I was 18 years old.
Well, yeah, the addictive behavior or substance is the solution. That's not the problem. The problem is the way that you feel. And you're just like, you don't like the way you feel. Therefore, you reach for a drink or a drug or shopping or gambling or sex or whatever it is, to feel better. And that's Dr. Gabor Mate says, the question is not why the addiction, the question is why the pain.
Right. And I love that model. One of the hardest pieces of hearing about how a lot of the world talks about addiction in America is that, we have to stop addiction, and we have to stop the drugs, and we have to stop the actual taking of the substances, right? And that's their focus. Like, I grew up in, the DARE era when it was, just don't do drugs, just say no to drugs. And it's so nice to come around now. And granted, I still believe in that, right? To just not do them. And that won't send your life into a downward spiral. But it's so nice to get to that place where we're realizing we need to look at the symptoms. Because that's just the Band-Aid of what the underlying, not feeling good in your own skin is all about. So it's so nice to be having those conversations now. And I just feel thankful in a weird way that I went through everything that I went through, so that now I get to be part of those conversations to help enlighten others to the idea that, nobody starts out looking to be an alcoholic or a drug addict or any other of the isms that you describe. And It attacks anybody, right? There's no one that's immune to it. And I would have been that perfect example that people would have been like, that would never happen to Hannah. And yet it completely took me down. So it's a great thing that we're even breaking the stigmas by acknowledging that addictive illness does happen and can happen to anyone.
So when did you said 18 years old, when did you first start experimenting with drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, so my spiral began when I was the end of my junior year in high school, and I had applied early decision to an Ivy League school that I came from this family that was an expectation for me. I know that the bar is extremely high, but I had not prepared myself that may not happen. I had not prepared myself that it could be okay if that didn't happen. So needless to say, even with all of the things that I was trying to do in my life to be perfect on paper, to look good on a resume, I got denied from this college that I had planned on going to for years. And it rocked my world. It brought me to that precipice of like if every single thing I've done was to achieve this goal and it still wasn't enough, then why the bleep would I even try, right? It was an effort moment. Well, then screw it all. I'm not going to do all the right things if it doesn't give me the right outcome. And so I turned around and I remember like looking at the kids who partied instead of who studied together on Friday nights. And I looked at them and I saw the alcohol and just the gathering in the field parties and all the stuff. And I was like, it looks like they're having way more fun than I'm having. And if I'm not going to get the results that I want anyway, screw it. I want to go see what that's like instead. And so I made a very intentional decision to go try the other path. And it was a very quick slide downhill when I jumped onto that, because like anything, I'm an addictive personality. If I do something, if I set my mind to something, I'm like 0 or 100%. I don't do very much in the middle. And so I took to partying in that same tenaciousness with which I do everything. And I went out to Arizona State. I started drinking the senior year of high school. I was like the co-captain of my ski team, and I started drinking, and I ended up showing up hungover and drunk some mornings, and I would like fall off the course, and I would, like potentially run into trees, and it started to become a big mess. But nobody knew. Nobody knew that that's what it was. I went overseas. I did an exchange program. I started to drink seriously in Germany, because that's what you do in Germany. It's beer and bratwurst, right? So then I came back.
Where were we at in Germany?
In Hameln, a little town called Hameln.
Okay, I don't know where that's at.
Have you been?
I've been to Cologne.
Okay. Yeah, we did. It was a high school tour. So, we stayed with a host family and then we went around, but the drinking age there was 18. And so we all just got in. We went into the clubs and I tried drinking for the first time, and everybody just got hammered all the time. And from the very, very, very beginning of me drinking, it was never to have a drink. Like, I don't remember ever being like, oh, I would like a cocktail or two, or a wine cooler then, or two, or a beer or two. It was give me one, give me 10, and give me a blackout. And I don't want to feel, I don't want to think, I don't want to know anything. And that was my drinking from the very beginning. And then I think I chose Arizona State sort of on purpose, actually, because I wanted to experience party life.
Of course. It sounds like it. So you have Ivy League school over here. That doesn't work. So screw it. I'm going to go to ASU, one of the top party schools in the country.
Yep.
There you go. Okay,
and I'm going to let them teach me everything that they can. I had never really seen a football player. I had never seen a marching band. My hometown was 40,000 people and I knew, mostly everybody. And so I came out to the big city and immediately just kind of took on the identity of being a party girl. And I let other people who were more experienced with it teach me. And they taught me about femininity. They taught me about how to put makeup on and how to wear high heels, because I was such a tomboy my whole life. Like, I'd be the kid who was out climbing trees and catching salamanders, I'm not the kid who ever wore heels or a skirt. Until I was dared to try a pageant. And that was because I was such a tomboy, but they taught me how to kind of be a girl. And then in that, the lubrication to start to use my femininity as something that would reaffirm me and get me attention and get me validation was that I would drink, like everybody does, to go have confidence with people of the other sex. And so it became this just cycle of like validation and partying. And, but when everyone around you is doing it, it didn't feel unhealthy, because everybody was binge drinking. Everybody was blacking out. Everybody was going to Rocky Point, Mexico, and, just doing crazy, crazy stuff. And I look back and the number of times that I put my life in danger, it just, by the grace of God, go I. I really should have had much, much worse times there than I did.
So when did you realize you had a problem?
Yeah, it was easy to disguise for a very long time. It all came crashing down in 2009 when I had what looked on paper to be a great life. I had achieved this job that, the glass windows looking over the lake, and I had the car with the 3 letters, and I had a husband and a house, and I thought I was making it. I was 28 years old. And what actually happened, and I hate telling these stories. Like, it's really awful to go back to this place, but it's important for people to know, who you can be when you're not sober versus who you can be when you are. And a person that I actually thought was my first love, and it ends up he was my first addiction. Like, he was a person addiction that emotionally, psychologically was an incredibly abusive situation for me to be in at a young age. When I was 18, he returned into my life when I was 28. And I had always thought that was my ticket out. Like, that was the knight on the white horse that came in to rescue me, like all the fairy tales. And if you ride away with this prince, you'll never have a worry again. You'll never have to worry about money. You'll never have to worry about anything. And so I left my husband and I went and pursued this fantasy of being with this other person. And in that process, I lost my job. I lost my car. My family sided with my husband because my husband was amazing and sane and awesome. And I very obviously was not at that moment. But I left everything to go pursue this fantasy, and very abruptly, just like the first time, imagine that, very abruptly, that became boring for him, and that ended. And then I was left with nothing. So I had no house. I was completely just destitute. And it was like a country song backwards, I lost my house and my car and my dog and my family and my husband and the whole thing. So I went and stayed on a friend's couch. And man, I remember him driving away and being left feeling so hopeless that, again, if this dream didn't give me everything in life, then what, why bother? Like, why bother with relationships? Why bother with jobs? Why bother with family? Because they just leave you when it gets rough anyway. That was my thinking, right? That all or nothing. And so I became suicidal. I just felt so hopeless and helpless that I wanted the pain to stop. And I ended up checking myself into an IOP, or an intensive outpatient program for depression. And part of that program, because, alcoholism or anything with addiction in it was totally not okay in my family. Like, no one would ever admit to that. But you could admit maybe to a depression. Like, mental illness was a little softer, right? That they could tell their friends. Yeah. And I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that was the social construct we're in.
So when you showed up to the IOP, did you tell the IOP, yeah, I have depression and also maybe a little alcoholism? Or did you just say, no, just depression?
Not a problem with alcohol. No, it was all
okay, because we're working in the business. We get people like that. I mean, imagine that, right? They show up, they're like, oh no, I don't have a problem with drugs. I don't have a problem with alcohol. It's just depression. It's just anxiety. It's just whatever. And we quickly find out that, yeah, you're probably not being totally honest. Okay, so go ahead.
And I really, to myself, I was being as honest as I ever could be, but I had no idea that was an issue. Like I said, I self-defined as being a party girl, and being that didn't mean I had a problem with alcohol. It just meant that's what I did. That's what I was good at, right? I went down to the clubs and to the bars, and I knew people, and people knew me. And so I felt like, that was where I got my identity from. So when I went into the treatment program, I remember the first day after the intake, the director hands me this sheet of paper, and it was a list of 100 feelings. And she goes, I think you probably have some trouble identifying these. And I looked at them and I was like, I didn't know that there were 100 feelings. Like, not only do I not know how to identify, I couldn't have written them all down on a list. And that's how it began. And then they said, well, as part of this 30-day program, you have to not drink alcohol for 30 days. And I just started laughing. And I was like, I don't have a problem with alcohol. I'm here for depression treatment, right? I'm here for you to fix everyone else in my life and help me to manage them. Because if I can get them under control with their expectations and their behaviors, then I'll be okay. That's what I wanted. Program. And they were like, okay, but let's start with you not drinking for 30 days. And I was like, what part of that didn't you understand? I don't have a problem with alcohol. And they're like, good, then show us.
Yeah, no, it's the best. It's the best. We have sober living homes, and when people come to us with the depression, the anxiety, it's like, okay, well, since alcohol is not a problem, it won't be a problem not to drink for 30, 60 days while you're here, right? And it's like, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, right.
Right. And so very quickly, and then I was like, I got cocky about it, and I was like, well, okay, fine, I can do that because I don't have a problem, right? And so if that was what I needed to do, then I was, of course, I was just going to fly through that test. And sure enough, it ended up that it was a lot harder, because without the alcohol, it was no fun to go to the bars. And at the bars was where I sought validation from guys. And that was what filled me, like my own self-worth, right? And then if I wasn't at the bar, I found out I would be at like Ben and Jerry's binging ice cream to make myself feel better, or in the kitchen, and it would be like 20,000 calorie binges just to numb the angst, like the heebity-jeebities in my skin. And so pretty quickly, it became apparent that I couldn't leave my house. And so I had to like lock myself in on a Friday night and a Saturday night so that I wouldn't go out and do all of this stuff that started with drinking. But drinking allowed me to do all of the other behaviors, right? It wasn't necessarily what the end all be all for me. It was just, the lubricant to do anything that I wanted at any time without having to answer to anyone. And then I realized pretty quickly that was at least part of the problem. And then I realized that there were layers, right? Like there was a validation seeking, or call it sex and love addiction, that was a real thing that was buried in there. And I think now that we're talking about trauma, it probably came from so many years of being so unattractive that then I went to the extreme on the other side. And I used men to feel powerful. The more wealthy or the more powerful or influential they were, the more I could ride on their coattails and feel like I was those things too. And I would get to pretend, I didn't have to sleep with them. I just needed to know that I could get them to like me more than I could get them to like their spouse, or more than I could get them to like, whoever in their past. And then once, it feels so gross to say this out loud, Tim. I hate this part of the story, but that gave me a sense of power. And I ended up feeling like I was using them instead of the classic story of the man using the woman. And I became the huntress, right? That got what I wanted. And I thought that it was empowering. And it ended up being that it was just destroying me.
So you went to this IOP. Like, it sounds like there's kind of a lot that I'm hearing from you. And so you went to this IOP for depression, and that was when you also realized that you were also an alcoholic. Was that when you realized you were an alcoholic?
Yeah, it was in that program. I realized that I had a major problem with alcohol. I wouldn't say the word alcoholic for another probably 6 months, Alcoholics, like alcoholics were the guys under the bridge with the paper bags. That was the only definition I had, the visualization I had ever seen of a personification of an alcoholic. The only person I had ever seen, I'd seen two people in my history not drink alcohol at events. And both of them were like the awkward, quiet people in the back corner of the room, whatever room that is, that wouldn't talk to people. And they were like socially awkward. Okay. So between the alcoholics and then those non-drinkers, there was nothing about that I was going to relate to. But yeah, it showed me that I had a problem with alcohol. It showed me that I had a problem with attention from men. And it showed me that I had a problem with food. And all of those things were just a big, hot, jumbled mess at that time. We worked through a lot of it. We worked through some coping skills and some different life training in 30 days, but you don't get a ton, as you know, in 30 days. So right after that 30 days was over, I realized how problematic my thinking about life was. And I went, you know what, Hannah, you were trained in business, and if you look at something like a business, like look at my life as a business, what are the returns that you've gotten? You're 28 years old. What do you have to show for this? And I've lost everything. And I had no relationships that were meaningful, and I had no material possessions that were meaningful, and I had no peace. So I was like, okay, you have failed. You've bankrupted this business called your life. And now you should probably go hire a different CEO because you kind of sucked. Like, you tanked this. And so I checked myself into 3 12-step programs all at once. And that became the basis for relearning how to think and how to be in the world as if I were a newborn starting over, learning from different people, learning different philosophies and different ways of thinking. And then, they helped me to rebuild my life from the ground up in a much stronger foundation than I ever had.
What was the final straw before you checked yourself into 3 different 12-step programs?
Knowing that I was getting out of a treatment program and I didn't know how to do life. I didn't know how I was going to achieve better results with the same thinking and the same behaviors that had brought me to the place that I was in. Okay. Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? So yep. I was scared to death to go out and do the same thing, and I looked at it objectively and I was like, well, I am out of, if my best thinking got me here, then obviously this isn't going to work. And I need to press reset. And I just completely did a start over. And that's the gift of a rock bottom. Like, when my family, like I said, my family had abandoned me at that time, and as they should have, and that's okay. They needed to do that at that moment. My husband was trying to move on with his life. And I just became in rebuild Hannah and do a different way of living mode. So I did 3 12-step programs day and night. I did at least 3 meetings a day and 1 hour a day on the phone with a sponsor. Every single day, I pulled pennies out of the couch. I would bum rides. I would take the bus. I would walk to meetings. I would do whatever was necessary for about 8 months. And that was like what really began to rebuild Hannah.
Was that 2009?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how many times did you try to get clean and sober? Was it just one time?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of months were slippery, right? Like I I wouldn't say that it was relapse, but I had to drink alcohol, for example, to show up at an AA meeting. So I would be like drinking wine with girlfriends that would come over to the house. And I was like, oh guys, I got to run. I have to go to an AA meeting. Can I pour that wine into a to-go cup? So then I would take my coffee cup and I would like take my white wine to my AA meeting, of course, driving, which is, really awesome looking back.
Yeah.
And I would show up just buzzed enough that I could make it through the meetings. And that was probably the first 3 months. Like I had to be under the influence of something to make it to all of these meetings, to hear the hard love that they were giving me. And so in that time frame, there was fluidity, I would say. But when it hit, it just was one of those moments. Like giving up the alcohol, actually, when it was, I feel like it was lifted from me. It wasn't like I ever really white knuckled. It was lifted from me. And the same with the validation seeking from men. At some point, doing all of the deep work, it released the need to fill my soul with that kind of behavior and that kind of attention from other people outside myself. I had to learn to look within and to connect to a higher power instead of connect to, people around me to get that validation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like some codependency, which Ken Richardson, who's the founder of Coda, he'll say that codependency is the root of all addictions, and seeking validation, people pleasing, that's all part of it. It's all part of it. So what would you say is what's your sobriety date?
So I'm September 25th, 2009.
Okay. Awesome. And tell me about your first year. This show is dedicated to people in their first year of recovery, because my belief is that the first year is the hardest, and getting to the first year, that's the first milestone that people got to get to. More than 90% of people can't make it to a year. The first year is the hardest. So tell me about your first year. I mean, you told me a little bit. For 8 months, you went to 3 meetings a day. You called your sponsor for an hour a day. I mean, those are, are you willing to go to any lengths to get sober and to stay sober? And so tell me about your first year.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Those first 3 months were unequivocally the hardest time in my entire life. I would probably birth another child before I would do those 3 months of sobriety, early sobriety again. Everything hurt. And I love that you're talking to the newcomer in this. And again, this is the reason that I share my ugly story and I, air my dirty laundry, because I didn't have an example back then of what a sober life could look like, and why would you go through all of this pain of early sobriety and all of the awkwardness and the weird, every single event in your life, you're going to have to learn how to do differently, and relationships you have to do. Why would you go through that? And so I love that you're talking to people, because I also feel like we can handle anything that we expect, and so if people know in advance that the first year is going to suck, but it's worth it, then they can program their brains. Like, okay, this is going to be bumpy, but hold on, because in the end, it'll be worth it. And that's just how it was for me. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know. I never had a picture of someone who had been through recovery before to be an example or a guiding light in some way for me. So I was just doing it blind. I didn't know how challenging it would be, but I knew at the core of me that the way I was doing life, which started with my thinking and my belief systems, was no longer going to serve me. And that was not the path to get me to the life that I truly, truly wanted. I already tried the other direction, doing it all externally, doing it the right way according to the business books and the business schools and how you achieve greatness and all this stuff. And it didn't work. So I knew that. And I knew that I needed to give it all up. And so recovery, the early days, was me going, I surrender. I'll do what I'm told for the first time in my life. And I mean, before I would wake up in the morning, I remember having the covers, and this was at the friend's house, on the couch, I'd have the covers to here, and my body just ached. My body hurt from withdrawals, and my mind hurt, and it was foggy, and everything was just so unclear. And I hated myself, and I hated life, and but I didn't know any alternatives. And my blanket would be up to here, but I would get on the phone with my sponsor and just be like, oh, what? And I don't know what to ask or to say. And she would just keep me on the phone, and she would start asking me these really simple questions. And then that somehow became showing up to 3 meetings, and then meeting people for coffee, and slowly but surely, if I couldn't do something like I used to do, I remember being in Barnes and Noble, and I had forgotten how to not engage in flirtation. And I know that sounds so weird, but I didn't even know how to not flirt. I did it so often with so many people that I literally had to call someone when I was in line in Starbucks and put my head down, and in Barnes and Noble and in the grocery store, and get on the phone with somebody from program and be like, okay, talk me through this. I'm going to keep my head down. Or how to go through a grocery store without doing the liquor section first, because that's all I really cared about,
Yeah.
And all of those things. I remember in the first year, man, every event was a brand new thing. To do your first Thanksgiving sober, was monumental. To go to my first football game without drinking. Every event had an alcohol that was associated with it, right? Don't people have that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything in life. I mean, for me, everything revolved around drinking and doing drugs. I mean, every single thing. Concerts, football games, baseball games, weddings, parties, birthday parties, Christmas, Thanksgiving, July 4th, Memorial Day, all of it. There was always everything. Yeah. And so that first year, it's not only is it your first year and it's the hardest, but you're also doing all of these things for the very first time in your life while trying to stay clean and sober.
Right. And everything has associations with it, right? It was impossible, white knuckling, to go sit at a baseball game and not drink beer, until I dropped out. So in the early days, some things that helped me was, and I know there's controversy around whether to do or not do this, but at times I would drink non-alcoholic beer at the beginning, so that I could still have that sensation. I could practice going out and not getting hammered at a baseball game, but I could still enjoy, the cold, frothy experience, until eventually I no longer even needed that. I could find something else, a soda or something that would work instead. But I kind of, I tried to replace with non-alcoholic. If I went to someone's house, I would go get some non-alcoholic wine from the grocery store. There's 2 or 3 brands back then. I don't know how many there are now, because I don't even do that anymore. I mean, it's essentially Welch's on, that's souped up. But it helped to switch the habits that were so thoroughly ingrained. I would still drink wine at night, but it was non-alcoholic wine. So for me, it wasn't a complete cold turkey all the time. I had to slowly, move into switching things here and there. And I would have to hang out with different people. It just, the first year is a complete unraveling of everything that I thought I understood about how to do life. And the coolest part for me was the gift of that rock bottom of just being all right, I'm looking for peace. I'm looking for some sort of contentment in this life. And the only people that I saw that truly in their eyes were the people in recovery. So I was willing to do whatever they told me to do to get that. And that's really what the first year looked like.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing you say is you realize that your best thinking got you where you were. Okay. And you realize that you had to take suggestions. And I think that's probably the number one suggestion is be willing to take suggestions, because your best thinking got you where you are today. And if you want to go somewhere else, if you want your life to look different, you got to listen to somebody else. Tim has to listen to somebody else besides Tim. Hannah needs to listen to somebody besides Hannah if you want your life to look different. And that's what you did. And that's why you were able to make it through that first year. And then obviously you're still here.
What was amazing too is the gifts of doing that work. I didn't do the work for my husband at that time. We had divorce papers on the counter and we were moving towards separation. And like I said, he was trying to move on. And I didn't think that he was the one for me anyway. At that point, that was my own belief system. And my sponsor was like, no, you are not to date. You are not to call any formers. You are not to engage in flirtation with a single male, whether you know him or don't know him. You are to do you for a year. And she was adamant about that, right? And that was part of like breaking the codependency and the validation and all that stuff. And honestly, that saved my marriage, Tim, because after 8 months, my husband, who, we hadn't completely finalized the separation yet. We still had a dog together, and we still had to kind of like touch base every once in a while. He watched this process from me that I did for me, not him. And at the end of 8 months, and I can't say it without choking up, he goes, Hannah, you have finally become the person that I always knew you could be, and you never allowed yourself to be. And at that moment, I realized that I did have a deep love for him that I never allowed myself to feel and to experience, because that would be commitment, and that would disallow me from doing these other behaviors. And we got back into couples therapy that had failed to save us prior. We went back in and we said, hey, is this relationship possible on new terms? And let's scratch all the old stuff. We had been together for a decade, 8 years, I think, when that happened. And so we said, if this can work, we have to completely start from scratch and make new expectations. He had to practice radical forgiveness of a long history of my indiscretions in every way possible. And his forgiveness makes him the hero in this story, quite frankly, not me. But from there, we said, you know what, we have to put recovery as number one, and our higher power has to be in there, and then our marriage, and then anything else comes below that. But he knew from the onset, because my husband, Chris, he immediately, when I started to do this spiral downhill, he picked up all these books on addiction. And to his credit, he started to learn about addictive illness as the disease that it is. And he started to see that it isn't Hannah that was doing all of those awful things. Because when you put some alcohol into me, I become a different person. Like any moral foundation is just gone, just through the window.
Out the door.
Out the door. Like there's no playbook for being a good human for me when you put alcohol into this body. Mm-hmm. And he came to this understanding through learning and reading about addiction, that it was alcoholism and it was addiction that's like a parasite. This is how I describe it now, that was inside of me. And the parasite has a single objective. It's just to stay alive, even if it has to kill the host, right? Mm-hmm. So he started to look at all my behaviors as the parasite acting out within me because it was alive and well. And then once we killed that parasite in me, he could start to see the real Hannah. And the real Hannah doesn't act like that. So he forgave me because he acknowledged that was the disease that was moving during those times. And so now we know recovery's got to be number one in our relationship. And we've been together ever since, and we're stronger. And he shares his story openly too. We said, if we can make it through this, our way of giving back is to be willing to be an open book for an ugly story that other people might be able to be helped in the process. And so we both talk about it.
That's amazing. That's so cool. And one of the things it makes me think of, there's a guy that he's pretty well known, and he had some sexual indiscretions, and it was in the news, and it was a big deal, right? And they were all but divorced, right? And he went into treatment, and then he started doing his own work. And one of her mom's friends, who's a psychologist, said, listen, I understand that he's the mother. I understand that he's the one that did all of those bad things to you. But if both of you guys don't do the work, you're never going to make it. And I saw him, I was having coffee with him, and he said, this was about 2 years after the fact. And I said, how are things going with you and your wife? And he said, they're amazing. They're better than they've ever been. And that's what I think of when I hear you talk about your relationship with your husband, is he realized that he obviously had to do his own work, and he had to come to his own realizations, and it wasn't all on you. Like, Absolutely. even though you're the one with the behaviors. Yeah. Because I see that all the time. Parents or loved ones are like, no. I'm not doing any work. It's him. He's the problem. And that is never going to work. If someone wants to make it to the other side with their spouse, with their loved one, with their child, with their parent, like whatever. Everybody has to do the work.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's such an awesome message. I love that, you're in treatment centers on a daily basis, helping families navigate that. And like, I look at it, if your family member, if your spouse had cancer, you don't just go, oh, that's their problem. Like they did that, right? That's happening to them. So I'm just going to wait until they're healed and then I'll come back. You go, oh, how can I be an advocate for you to help you become well? And with addictive illness, it becomes a little trickier because you don't want to be too enmeshed. Like my husband would not have been able to be with me through that process. I didn't even think I loved him at that time. I would have said straight up, like, nope, next. Yeah. But that was my own sickness. So some separation was healthy. But once I was healthy enough to acknowledge that I did truly love him and it was the addiction that was making me crazy. Then he really did step up and realize, like, what did he do in this that contributed to it? And it was really for him realizing that he was codependent on me because I became aggressive when I was drinking and I would pick fights so that it would allow me to go out and do whatever I wanted to do. And I just sort of diminished him. Like I broke him down and he became smaller and smaller and smaller. And the more he did, the less I respected him. And then the less I respected him, the more I would like verbally crush him. And so it just became this really nasty cycle. And we needed that space for him to come out and say, you know what, whether this is going to work with you or not, I'm not going to put up with this in my life. And here's what my boundaries are. So I learned my boundaries in that break and he learned his boundaries. And only if they would work well together were we willing to re-navigate that. But yeah, he acknowledged that it was absolutely his duty to learn about this and to do his work too, for sure.
That's amazing. And I'm sure that's the only reason why you guys have the relationship that you have today.
Yeah. And we practice what we learn, like crazy honesty is a massive part of our relationship. And that has to go both directions, because somebody can't be honest with me if I don't create a safe landing spot for them to be vulnerable with me. And so if I go to him and I tell him that I'm thinking something or I'm doing something that makes him feel uncomfortable or that makes him feel threatened and he reacts defensively, then that's not a safe space for me. So we both, and vice versa, so we both committed way early on that we can tell each other things that might hurt, but we will not respond from a place of defensiveness. We'll take it. We can tell each other things like, if it sounds superficial, but if, you're putting on a lot of weight and it bothers me, it can go both directions. We're allowed to say those things. I'm allowed to say to him, if I'm triggered by another man that crosses my path and I'm like, whoa, this is a thing. This is an issue for me. I not only am allowed to, but I have to tell my husband this. Because then together we can diffuse that energy. I have to tell him if we're at a restaurant and that margarita with the rocks that he's drinking is really tempting. And I'm kind of going, all right, I want to hang with you tonight, but that's really got me going. He doesn't get aggressive about it. He has to be like, I hear you. And the next drink, I'll order something different, and it goes both ways. So that radical honesty has to become a thing for people to make it through this recovery long term. And it's not always pretty. Like couples not in recovery think we're crazy, the stuff we talk about. Because it's everything. There are no limits on what we can talk about. And that's the only way that I can stay sober, because secrets, would keep me sick. Yeah,
you're as sick as your secrets.
Yep.
What has it been like to air your dirty laundry?
Yeah, at first I met a lot of resistance from my immediate family. It was this beautiful family, but one that said, just put a smile on your face and everything is okay. And how you appear to the outside world, as long as you appear great, then all is well. And that obviously nearly killed me, that quest for perfection. So when I started to air the dirty laundry, they were not in love with it. It was a small town and it was not a thing that you wanted your kid to be acknowledged to be an alcoholic or to be in recovery or any indiscretion or shameful kind of thing. And at that point, I didn't care. I had Chris back and we said, this is our promise as a thank you to the higher power that allowed us a second chance, is we're going to share it. And very quickly, I started to share my story with my town. And the results of that, Tim, were mind-blowing. I was made to believe that if I ever showed...
Okay, so you're in Arizona though, right?
I'm in Arizona now. Early recovery was in Vermont.
You were still in Vermont. Okay. Because you went to
Yeah.
ASU.
I went back and forth. I didn't tell that part.
Okay.
So after my first year at ASU, I over-partied, and then I went back to Vermont to try to sort things out. And it didn't go away. The geographic cure didn't work, and it didn't all go away and heal itself. So I was in Vermont at the time that I got sober, and my family was not having it. But what was amazing is that for the first time in my life, people started to respond to me in a way that was really authentic. Like I had people, how do I phrase that? So my whole adult life, the feedback was that there's something that's just not real about Hannah. She just seems kind of fake. Like she just seems phony or not all there, or like we just can't get to the inside, kind of a thing. And it always made me mad because I didn't realize that I wasn't being fully authentic. I wasn't being authentic to myself. Like I didn't know who I was. I was anything to anybody, right? Like tell me who you want me to be and I'll be that. And in early recovery, I just started to be vulnerable. And I was taught previously in the business world, you don't show vulnerability. And so when I did, it was this big risk. But immediately, Tim, people started to respond in the most positive way. And when I shared something that was a weakness in me or a concern or a failing, instead of always talking about my resume of successes, right, to try to impress people, I talked about what I was failing at. And then somehow people started to like me for the first time in my life. And I had real conversations with people. And it just ended up being such a gift. Like even in the business world, people trusted me more when I told them that, I was an alcoholic and I was in recovery because I blew my life up, and now I'm on track, but that's it. And they were like, what? Tell me more. What? And, and now I don't do small talk. I want to know when I have a conversation with somebody, I want to know something that's a pain point for you. Like I want to talk about the things that we're struggling with, and we can connect on that level, because that has been the greatest gift that I have found, I think, out of all of this, is just the power of vulnerability and the connections that creates. So, I try to lead most conversations with, here's the stuff that I suck at today. Here's what I feel like I'm seeing. Here's a big blemish. Here's the thing that I screwed up today. Here, and that I found ironically to be what has helped me in relationships and in business. So totally unexpected, but how cool.
Yeah. So cool. So cool. The gifts of being clean and sober.
Yeah.
So tell me about your life today.
Oh, it's a beautiful chaos, right? I had this crazy blessing 2 years after my recovery anniversary. So on September 25th, 2011, to the day, our first daughter was born.
Wow.
So call that a coincidence? I think not. I remember laying in the hospital bed just being like, today's a really special day. And I can't remember why. I was like, was it a great aunt's birthday? Is there some federal holiday? And then all of a sudden it just hit me. It was like this whoosh going, this is your recovery anniversary. And this baby is your higher power telling you very in uncertain terms that you are given your life because of being sober. And not every time I look at the kid, she's 10 now, so she annoys the bejeebers out of me a lot. She's like a preteen. It's crazy. I love her, but she's crazy. But sometimes I look at her, like when she's sleeping, and I'll just be honest, right? And I'm like, oh, she's a little angel. And God gave me her because of recovery. And I look around and it just, I have this beautiful home now. We live in Southwest Chandler. I work in real estate. I have clients that I care about and I treat them like family. And I connect with them on vulnerability, which is amazing. And my husband and I, like I said, we're stronger than ever. My family and I are back. My parents actually moved out here to Arizona from Vermont a few years ago. It was like right before COVID happened. And so now they live 3 miles away. We have 3 kiddos. They're 10, 7, and 3. And my brother and sister-in-law moved out here. And it's just the peace, the contentment of just knowing that I'm probably not going to do something to blow my life up today, and it's pretty, I'm going to be able to mitigate any damage that I might cause if I say something not nice, or if I, act in a way that is unbecoming the person that I want to be, which is someone of complete honesty and complete integrity. I can now easily and quickly apologize. I don't have to linger with those resentments and the self-hatred. I don't have to hurt myself anymore over hating who I am, because I clean up my side of the street on a regular basis. And I connect with other humans in recovery. They are my tribe. I get to do things like pageants and still use that as an opportunity to practice showing up in a really high glam environment as the authentic version of me. And it's a stretch at times, but it's beautiful practice. And I mean, they said early in recovery, that you may be given a life beyond your wildest imagination if you're willing to go to any lengths. And I'm really living that.
That's amazing. So why are you passionate about sharing your story?
I wish that I had an example, when I was younger and when I was struggling, that somebody just who had a life that looked cool could do it without alcohol or substances or behaviors of any kind. And it's important to me that this is how I turn around and I offer the hand to the people who are behind me. Anything that I am, anything that I have, that's either relationships or material or internal in any way, I owe to recovery. And so it feels like with great gifts come great responsibility. So I just show up, to just say, hey, this is what can happen. This is who addiction can happen to. Surprise. And this is what recovery can look like, because I never saw that. And if I can inspire a couple of people in my imperfect story by sharing vulnerable stuff and by talking about the hard and the ugly, then I hope to make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah, awesome. Is there a question you wanted me to ask you today that I did not ask?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. What advice do you have for newcomers?
Just go all in. Just go all in and take the same intensity with which you drank and partied and lied and manipulated to try to get your way, to try to get your butt in a chair and to listen to what other people have to tell you and to try to actively change your life. Because the amount of cajoling and conniving and manipulation that I used in my life, when channeled properly, it can create miracles. So the things that you feel like are holding you back, to anybody who's new, eventually, if you do this long enough, are going to become the things that are your greatest gifts. So hang in there. Just don't give up. Just don't give up. People told me, let us love you until you learn to love yourself. And I heard that over and over and over. And at first I hated that expression and I just wanted to punch them in the nose. But they said it over and over. Let us love you until you learn to love yourself. And I didn't understand it, but I finally get it. And I want to say the same thing to all the newcomers. Keep showing up and let us love you until you learn to love yourself, and that you're worth it. You're worth the life that you dreamed of. And only by getting sober and doing what you're going to learn in recovery do you have a shot. That's my experience. And that's all I can share. I can never tell people what to do. I can just tell them what worked for me. And that's the only way that I have a shot, is if I stay connected and if I share what was given to me with other people. It reminds me.
Awesome. Where can people find you, or how can they find you if they want to stay connected?
Yeah, so I'm really not that awesome on social media, but you can find me on social media at Real Hannah Kirkpatrick. You'll see a lot of when I was really up on social, it was during the pageant year, and showing a lot of my travels and exciting stuff that happened during that year. But those are my personal accounts, and then I do real estate in the Chandler area in the Southeast Valley. Work with investors and work with just all different types of wonderful people. And you can find me, if you want, professionally at Arizona Dream Living. And I would love to, get a direct message and say hi, whether it's inspiration, whether it's just to say, hey, I'm in long-term recovery too, and I love chatting about it. I love and admire anybody who's open about their story. So I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome. Hannah, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I had a good time. It was great.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.